Welcome to Let's Learn, a podcast by Ustaz. So we have with us Chirine Mouharam. She works as a consultant at BCG, and Chirine is a graduate from Harvard. So she's an Ivy League student. And today she's going to be giving us insight on her experience, and she's also going to be telling us what it takes to get into a top university, a top school such as Harvard.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. So when it comes to getting into a top school, I think there are a lot of kind of beliefs that I want to talk about and put aside, and then share some insights into what are key tips and tricks to get into a top school. So first of all, the first thing I want to talk about is grades and SAT scores. What I've noticed is that a lot of students that I talk to place a lot of emphasis on grades and SAT scores when they think about their college apps. So that kind of is the core, most important piece of their application to them, and their main focus as they're preparing for their college applications is, how do I get an even higher SAT score? How do I get even better grades? And while all of that is valid and grades and SAT scores are important, they are only a very small piece of the puzzle that top schools look at when they're making admission decisions. So you can kind of think grades and SAT scores, you can think of them as minimum qualifiers to some extent, where these top schools receive hundreds of thousands of applicants. They remove certain applicants who don't meet the minimum academic criteria, who don't have top grades, aren't top of their class, don't have good SAT scores. But then that leaves you with a huge pool of students still. And you still have to choose from that huge pool of very highly qualified students to then choose about 2,000 students who you're going to admit to your class. And so grades and SAT scores alone are not enough. They ensure that you're in that pool of qualified students, but they're not enough to get you into a top school.
Okay.
And so that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, because I've noticed that a lot of students really focus a lot on that. And as important as it is, there are even more important pieces of the application. And so that's what I want to talk about next. So I would say out of the application, the three key components are reference letters, extracurriculars, and the essay. And each of these carries a lot of importance. Before talking about each of these separately, I just want to first lay out how they all come together. When I'm looking at your application as an admission officer, what I'm trying to do is look at your whole file, look at your grades, look at your reference letters, look at your extracurriculars, look at your essay. And what I want to get out of it after reading your whole file from start to finish is now I have a good idea of who that person is. Now I can really imagine this person at Harvard in these clubs, maybe majoring in this. You want the admission officer, the person reading your application, to be able to picture you as a person beyond just like someone in the classroom. You want them to picture you, who are you outside of the classroom. Mm-hmm. And the main reason for that is the importance of community building, and these top schools really emphasize that.
Yeah.
And so how do you do that? A big question that you need to ask yourself as an applicant is, what story do you want to tell? Yes, you're a good student, and yes, you have good grades, but what story do you want to tell? Who are you as a person? How are you going to fit on campus? What is your contribution going to be to student life and the community? And how do you do that? How do you tell that story? It's by bringing together these three separate pieces: the reference letters, the extracurriculars, and the essays. Now, I'll go into talking about each one of these separately. First of all, let's start with the reference letters. One thing that I've noticed with students is that they typically go for teachers from subjects that they think are like hard and challenging subjects. Like, I want my math teacher and my physics teacher to write me a letter because it's going to be impressive. but your grades already speak to your academic excellence. Your grades already tell that story. You're repeating yourself if you have your math teacher write a short paragraph reference letter saying that you're a great student. They already know that from your grades. And so really what they're looking from the reference letters is someone who's able to speak not only about you as a student, but even more importantly and beyond that, about you as a peer. How do you interact with your peers, and who are you as a person? So when it comes to reference letters, the biggest advice I have is go for someone who knows you well. My reference letters was my English teacher. I didn't really have my philosophy teacher. I didn't really have any I didn't have my math teacher and my physics teacher write me a reference letter. Why? Because those other teachers knew me really well. They had taught me for years now. They saw me grow. They knew me as a person. I had gone on school trips with them, so they saw how I interacted with my peers, and I had a really strong relationships with those teachers. So they were able to not only say, oh, Chirine is a great student, but they were also able to talk about my character and my personality. Exactly. And how I interacted with my peers and talk about my intellectual curiosity outside of the classroom. And so that's extremely important. Don't go for the hard subjects because it's going to impress the schools. You already have your transcript to prove that you're good at these hard subjects. Go for teachers who know you really, really well. Yeah. So that's my first piece of advice for reference letters. Now, the second part is extracurricular activities. And what I've noticed, especially in Lebanon and in the French system, is that we place very little emphasis on extracurricular activities and a lot of emphasis on anything that's academic. And so on the opposite end, in the US, extracurriculars are extremely important, and they're a very important piece of your college application. Why? Because those top schools have a huge pool of very qualified students who can do great in classes. But what they want to admit the future leaders of the world. They want to admit people who have passion, who are passionate, who are driven, who are going to go above and beyond and do things in their free time and pursue their passions and show leadership skills, because these are really the people who in a lot of people's eyes are going to succeed in life. It's not only the people who are able to solve the math problem, but it's also the person who is passionate about something and driven and can show leadership skills. And so when it comes to extracurricular activities, I would say two key things: passion and leadership. And these are the two most important things to demonstrate. Passion can be in anything. I don't think, and that's the beauty of all these top schools, is that they're looking for a diverse student body. They don't want all of their students to be volunteering at NGOs as their extracurricular. Like, yes, that is great if you're passionate about it.
They can be into comic books.
Exactly. Yeah, don't feel like you need to fit in a mold, because that's exactly what they're avoiding. They're looking for a diverse student body. And so whatever you are passionate about, you want to pursue, be it chess, be it building robots, be it some sort of music, horseback riding, whatever it is, show that you have passion in something. Yeah. And how do you show that you have passion in something? It's not by not having extracurriculars that you've pursued for a month or 3 months and then dropped. Show continuity in something. Yeah, consistency. So, exactly. Show that you've been doing it for a while, and show that you don't do it once every 2 months, that you do it once weekly or twice a week. So that is how you show passion. It's something that you're really dedicating your time to. And then the second one is leadership. And when it comes to leadership, it's important to find activities where you can demonstrate leadership. And that can be things like, for example, being student body president, or being class representative, or being editor-in-chief of your school newspaper, or whatever it is, like basically being somewhere where you're leading a group and helping people coordinate their work, and like really helping driving work and effort. That is also very important to demonstrate. So any type of leadership skills and passion are kind of two key components to make sure that you show in when you're talking about your extracurricular activities.
Yeah.
And then finally, last but not least, and what I think is one of the most important pieces of the college application is the essay. And so about the essay, I want to mention kind of some don'ts or watch outs. A lot of times what I find students do is they look through like the Common App and they look at the top prompts provided by the Common App, and then they choose one and then they just dig into it. Before doing that, you want to take multiple step back and answer two questions. The first one is, what story am I trying to tell? So what is it that I want to tell these admission officers? What is it that I think is core to understanding who I am that I want to share with them? And then the second one is, so that's before writing your essay. Then after writing your essay, a very important question to ask yourself is, if someone didn't know me and read this essay, do they have an accurate and good representation of who I am as a person? Because what you find is sometimes you'll have prompts like, tell us about someone who's inspired you or someone, your role model. Students write a whole essay that is beautiful about how like their grandmother is their role model. But by the end of the essay, I know a lot about the student's grandmother and I know nothing about the student.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they ask you to talk about one experience that really has impacted you or shaped who you are. And students will write a beautiful story about the experience, but exactly. And then by the end of the essay, I know all about that one incident, but outside of that, I don't really know who that person is. And so I think it's what I did while writing my essay is I didn't even look at the prompts. I kind of wrote my own essay, and then at the very end, when I was ready to submit it, I tried to choose the prompt that best fit the essay that I had written instead of the other way around. Mm-hmm. And so it's really about not trying to answer the prompt word for word, but writing an essay that really speaks to who you are as a person. An essay that really lays out, here is like, by the end of it, you're gonna know these 3 things about me. And there are ways to do it. For example, one piece of advice is, what are the key traits that I want the reader to know about me by the end of this essay? So let's say I want them to know that I'm someone who's very empathetic. I want them to know that I'm someone who's very driven and ambitious. And I want them to know that I'm someone who is a leader in their community. And so really write out these 3 things. What are the key character traits? If someone were to describe me in 3 words, what would these 3 words be? And how can I write an essay so that by the end of it, the reader says, oh, this person seems very empathetic and driven and seems like a good leader. Yeah. You know? So it's really about it takes more than just finding a story that answers a prompt, but really thinking through, what is it that I want to say about myself? And how can I say it about myself in a story form and have the reader kind of infer these things by the end of the essay? Because also what you want to do is you want to provide evidence. I don't want to write an essay just being like, I am a very empathetic person. It's like, no, I want them to be able to, by the end of reading a paragraph, tell themselves, oh, she's very empathetic.
Yeah, you need to imply that, and they should drive it out of the essay.
Exactly. And you can make it explicit if you want to, but have some sort of foundation and evidence to it in story form.
Yeah.
And so the essay is very, very important, and I think that's where a lot of students get hung up in thinking that it's so important to really stick to a prompt given by the Common App versus really taking 10 steps back and being like, what is the story I want to tell about myself? And so once you've told that story in your essay, that's when all of the pieces that I've talked about, the 3 pieces, come together. Because what's going to happen is you're going to say stuff in your essay, and by the end of your essay, you want your reader to infer these 3 things about you or know these things about you. Then hopefully, ideally, what would happen is your teachers who know you really well will also mention these character traits and these things about you in the reference letters. So you'll speak about yourself, but then they'll go to the reference letters and find kind of proof. And
So they fall into each other.
Exactly. You want it all to come into, they're all pieces of the same story. Like the app is really a story that you're telling the reader. And if they're compelled by the story, by the end of reading your file, you're in.
Yeah.
And so it's my essay and me telling my own story, my reference letters and people who know me really well telling my story, and then finally my extracurriculars and my actions really telling my story, like what I do telling my story. And once these three pieces come together in a very like cohesive manner, then that's a compelling story, and that's really what gets you into a top school.
Yeah, that's amazing, and I love the way you put everything together. I have a question. So I feel like everything you've mentioned was kind of saying that what these top schools are looking for right now is a human.
Yeah.
So they're kind of not looking for a robot that's just so book focused, but they're looking for someone that's dynamic, that's able to have different types of skills, that's has different passions, can speak to people, knows how to talk about themselves, if anything, and all that. Do you think that is a bit too subjective when it comes to how you hire someone? So,
I mean, that's why these pieces that I talked about, these are not alone, they're not the pieces that are gonna get you into a top school. They're the pieces that are gonna make you stand out in a pool of very highly qualified students.
Yeah.
And so if you think about it from a job perspective, let's say there's 3 key qualifications that we are looking for to hire a community manager.
Yeah.
And we get 10 CVs, and the 10 CVs all have these 3 qualifications.
Yeah.
Then it's like they're all equally qualified.
What would make one stand out?
What is going to make one stand out? It's during the interview, who do I see myself working with most? Whose values and character most closely mirrors our company's values and character?
Yeah.
And so it's really more about, there is an objective metric, which is the grades and the SAT scores, but that's, as I said, is more of, for the top schools, is more of a minimum qualification.
First filter.
Exactly. It's kind of a first filter because they get hundreds of thousands of applicants. And out of these, do you know how many get perfect scores on the SAT?
Yeah, I'm sure.
They can't just choose the ones that got perfect score on the SATs and take them in.
Yeah.
There's more to it than that.
Yeah. Do you think it changed over the years? With it being more lenient towards having people stand out from a humanitarian perspective rather than just grades? Or has it always been that's how you get into a top school?
So I can't speak about like before I started looking into college. I started looking into college application, but when I started looking at colleges and prepping my college applications, which was back in 2015, I remember getting very much that advice from a lot of people who I had reached out to who were in these top schools.
Yeah.
So it was definitely already there.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question that I also want your opinion on, which is, so let's say you have this applicant that's all the rest, has good leadership, knows how to write a proper essay, works very well, is passionate, and could be book smart, but did not score well on SAT. Do you think a person like that can also qualify to a top school?
I wouldn't say that it's a deal breaker. So
yeah, that's my question.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a deal breaker to not have a good SAT score?
I don't think it's a deal breaker, but I will say it really depends. I don't think it's a deal breaker. I know I had a lot of friends with me at school who didn't get very high perfect scores on the SATs. And it seems now like more and more, at least in the last 2 years, that universities are placing less and less emphasis on SATs. I know that some universities are no longer even asking for SAT scores. But you want to be a good student. So maybe if let's say I was French educated, and so I don't have a perfect English. And so obviously on the English SAT English reading section, I'm not going to perform as well as someone who's
English educated.
English educated. But then I want to show that I would want to perform well in math, to show that like, oh, I have the logic, and I would want my school transcripts to show that like, oh, she's a top student and top performer. Maybe she's not. She's gonna need to work a bit more on her English in college.
Yeah.
But it isn't like, at the end of the day, grades are important, but they're important because they want to know that you won't fail. You know, they don't want to admit a student who's going to end up failing their classes and then having to drop out because they can't keep up with the academic pace.
Yeah.
So they want good students, but the SAT is not a deal breaker. Standardized tests are not.
So you would say, like, if someone someone has good grades in school but doesn't have the perfect SATs for whatever reasons, they get anxiety over exams, whatever it is, you would still advise that person to apply to a top university because you do not think it's a deal breaker.
Yes.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you a bit about yours. Can you tell us a bit about your experience?
Yes.
Like on a personal level, like what was your biggest challenge? How did it go? What really made you stand out when they interviewed you? Like, what is it? Like, I feel like when people listen to this, they'd want to have an example in front of them. So, like, can you tell me more about your experience?
Yes, definitely. So, as I mentioned, so when preparing I went to Harvard summer school while I was in high school, which is like a program for high school students to take classes at Harvard. And while I was there, I got to meet a lot of Harvard students, and I got to ask them and get their advice about like how to get into a top school, and kind of hear about like what insights they had from going through the application process. And so that helped a lot, and like me better understanding that like things matter beyond grades, and it's not just grades.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think going to Harvard for a summer school helped your application as well? So when admissions officers saw that, oh, you already went to Harvard, and did it help them like to accept you, or like do you think you got accepted also because you had this experience to go to Harvard and mingle with Harvard people? Or
I don't think it necessarily helped. Like, first of all, I got into top schools outside of Harvard, so I won't say that it was like, oh, it was a Harvard thing.
Yeah.
But also, second of all, yes, it may have helped, but I would say it was like marginal. Like, I don't think that the fact that I took classes
because
for
everyone
2 months,
takes it.
Yeah, I don't think it was a huge boost, but it definitely helped, and it definitely, to some extent, showed that I did what I was, because you get graded on your in your courses, and so because I did really well in my courses, it was also kind of a proof point of like, oh, I can handle the academics here, because like I was in a Harvard course and I did really well.
Yeah.
So it definitely helped, but I wouldn't say that's like an important thing at all.
Okay.
But what I would say would help is really thinking about, as I said, about my application as a story. And so, for example, when it came to reference letters, I really went to the teachers who knew me the best. I went to teachers I had gone on school trips with, and so who were able to talk about how intellectually curious I was in a different country, and how I was like walking through a museum, and like how I was interacting with my peers and sharing historic knowledge on the country, etc. So someone who was able to talk about like me outside of school. And then I had another teacher who had taught me for at least 5-6 years, and so was able to really talk about how was able to talk about like my character and who I am as a person, but also she knew about the extracurriculars that I did, and she knew about all the work that I did outside of the classroom, and she was able to also mention and talk about those in the application. So she was able to really paint a picture of like who I am as a person beyond just in the classroom. In terms of extracurriculars, I would say my passion has always been kind of social impact and doing social impact work and volunteer work. And so in growing up, I worked with Tamanna, which is like the Make a Wish Foundation in Lebanon, and I also worked with the Children Cancer Center of Lebanon. And so these are really things that I talked about, and things that I was really passionate about. And so things that I talked about in my extracurriculars, and that's what really I was passionate about. Like the Children Cancer Center, for a while I was working there every day after school. And then Tam and I was working on the weekends. And so showing passion there. And what I also did is I had someone who I had worked with at the NGO write me a reference letter.
Wow.
And so there was someone it was someone outside of a teacher, because you can do that. You can have someone who's not a teacher write a recommendation letter for you. And so I had someone who was able to talk about how I interacted with the kids and how I was in the NGO outside of school. And so that was kind of, I would say, the passion piece of it. And then in terms of leadership, I really got very involved at school in a lot of like any leadership positions or extracurriculars I could get my hands on. So I became like editor of the school newspaper, and I became like basically the equivalent of student body president, and was just like very involved trying to find whatever opportunities in school that would help demonstrate leadership, and things that intersected with things I was interested about. So I was very interested in writing, and so the newspaper was a perfect thing for me. I was always interested in kind of like, to some extent, politics, where it's like talking to students, figuring out what they want, and then talking with the administration, kind of trying to figure that out. So that's why like student body president made sense and was something that I found interesting. And then finally, in terms of my essay, it was really kind of an outside the box idea. As I said, I really didn't stick to any of the prompts. And I remember originally I had stuck to one of the prompts, and I had written about like a personal experience that I had gone through and kind of a challenge that I had overcome. And I remember sharing it with someone who I had met during Harvard Summer School. And he read it and he was like, "This is a beautiful story and so inspiring, but I met you for 2 months, and like I don't get from this story or from this
The person
essay,
he met.
yeah, I don't see the person I met." And that really helped me, because at first I was like, oh, it's great. It's kind of a sob story to some extent. It was like, oh, it'll make them like feel like they'll feel sad, blah, blah. And then what I realized is even better than making your reader feel sad is making your reader laugh. And so I ended up going more that route, and like ended up writing, basically my essay was how I pictured my first job interview to be. And so it was a dialogue where the interviewer would ask me a question, and then I would have 2 answers to each question. The first one being the me to myself answer, and the second one being me to the interviewer answer. So that way I was like he'd be like, tell me a bit about yourself. And the me to myself would be like, a bit about myself, where do you want me to begin? Do you want to know what I had for breakfast? If I had if I had a happy childhood, like it would take me hours to tell you about myself. And that was kind of like the inner dialogue. But then the actual response would be, I graduated top of my class from a top school with a degree in economics. I'm really passionate in X, Y, and Z. And so I was able to kind of demonstrate those like 2 sides of me, the like more serious professional side, and then the like more like the funnier, less like doesn't take herself too seriously side.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love the idea.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the idea. I have one last question.
Tell me.
You seem to be like a kid that grew up doing so much, and like you were into so many things, and you did all that. What do you think was the main motivation? Was it to get into a school, or were you just that type of person?
I think I was.
Yeah.
I would say it's more of a character trait. Like, yes, I remember saying that I wanted to go to Harvard since I was like, I think 10 years old. And I was like, my dream is to go to Harvard. And why? Because like I knew that Harvard was the best school, and I wanted to go to the best school. And that's really kind of what I wanted. And so I think that speaks more to my character of like I was always like looking
For the best.
for the best. I always wanted the best. I was like I was very driven and very motivated, and like I hated sitting and doing nothing. I really cared about helping others and really liked working on projects and doing things in my free time. And I was never the person who enjoyed just like kind of like spending my free time doing nothing. I always felt the need to be productive.
Yeah.
And so I would say it was more of a character thing. And then definitely like once you're in high school, you start more actively thinking about your college applications, and that's when you more actively start thinking about, okay, like which of my extracurriculars do I want to stick to and keep doing? Which of my teachers do I want to invest in and really build relationships with? But I feel like that came later in life.
Yeah. And like, let's say we have parents listening to us right now, and I feel like parents do like have a big impact on how you grew up and what kind of extracurricular activities you do. So what would you say to parents that want their kids as well to go to such schools and to become successful and to do all that? Because maybe a lot of parents are not very aware of what kind of route their kids are taking. So what would you say?
I would say help your kids uncover their passion versus kind of imposing on them very cookie cutter extracurricular activities. Like if your kid really, really doesn't enjoy something and like you have to drag them to tennis practice, let's say, the likelihood is once they're in high school, they're not going to be doing tennis anymore, you know? It's like really help, like give flexibility to your child to try different things. I tried dozens of extracurricular activities, and a lot of them I dropped a few months after. And that's kind of how I discovered what I was truly interested in, was the thing that I didn't want to drop after a few months. And it's the thing that I wasn't bored of after a few months. And my parents never forced me to stick to something when I wasn't passionate about it, because there's just no point